According to the American Psychological Association, people with anxiety have a future-oriented fear, which leads them to avoiding anything that could potentially trigger a stress response. In 2017, the National Institute of Mental Health reported that approximately 40 million people worldwide suffer from anxiety. Anxiety disorders are highly treatable, but recent surveys show that only 36.9% of those suffering from it seek treatment. This might be because most people with anxiety worry about the judgment of others and how the stigma against mental illness might negatively affect their lives. Does this sound familiar to you? Do you worry you might be suffering from anxiety and just don't realize it? Here are 10 telltale signs of hidden anxiety to look out for. 1. You don't like talking to people face to face. You can easily keep a conversation going for hours when you're texting or chatting online with a friend. But talking to someone in person, no, that's an entirely different story. Even if you already know them well or have talked to them online, you still get tense and nervous talking to them in person. You have trouble making eye contact or finding the words to respond, and you want to end face-to-face conversations as soon as they begin. 2, you're always self-conscious. Do you walk into a room and immediately feel like everyone is staring at you, listening to you, and judging your every move? Or perhaps you're overly conscious of the way you walk, the way you eat, the way you sit, the sound of your voice when you talk, and so on. This could be a sign that you have hidden anxiety. 3, you're easily upset or irritated. Has anyone ever told you you're too sensitive? Do you find your feelings getting hurt easily? Are you quick to get angry or upset with others over the littlest things? This kind of emotional volatility may be a sign that you have high-functioning anxiety, as anxiety can often make us easily overwhelmed and emotionally imbalanced. Frequent mood swings, temper tantrums, and irritability can be expected when you're overly anxious. 4, you're panicky and easily startled. Anxiety makes you want to be as in control and vigilant as possible. An unexpected phone call, a random knock on the door, an email with no subject, or a forgotten task you can easily finish. Anything is enough to send you reeling with panic. You go into a tailspin whenever something catches you off guard, and you find it hard to relax even when the smallest things don't go exactly as planned. 5, you're indecisive. Do you have trouble making even the simplest of choices? Are you afraid of making up your mind about something because you're so sure that whatever decision you make is going to be the wrong one? Oftentimes, anxiety can manifest as perfectionist tendencies, fear of failure, or distrust in oneself. If you can't make your own choices without thinking about it for hours and hours first, or consulting with all your friends and family, you might be harboring some hidden anxiety. 6, you overthink past conversations. You have a tendency to get hung up on past conversations no matter how much time has passed since then. You analyze the other person's body language, facial expressions, choices of words, and even the tone of their voice. You can't help but think about what you should have done or said instead, and it drives you crazy and keeps you on edge every time you remember it. 7, you're always making yourself busy. It's common for people with anxiety to have a strong need to keep themselves busy. They like to occupy themselves with simple tasks and do as many things as possible in a day because sitting still and doing nothing for a long time can make them feel restless and on edge. 8, you talk yourself down all the time. Life isn't always kind to us, and self-love and a balanced lifestyle doesn't come easily. Living with anxiety, especially if it's hidden or suppressed, can make it hard for us to feel good about ourselves and let ourselves feel happy. It makes us believe that we don't deserve it and traps us in a vicious cycle of negative self-talk and constant pressure to be perfect. 9, you have a lot of negative thoughts. Are you a pessimist who's quick to find the downsides in every situation? You find yourself getting upset or stressing out over even the most minor inconveniences? Is every day a constant battle with yourself against the spiral of panicked and irrational thoughts you have? In 1997, famed psychologist and cognitive therapist Aaron Beck termed this kind of thought pattern as catastrophic thinking, which he often observed in his patients who suffered from anxiety. And 10, you experience physical symptoms. Sometimes anxiety can be entirely physical because while your conscious mind may not always be aware of your anxiety, it will definitely make itself known to your body. Things like erratic heartbeats, chest palpitations, muscle tension, a clenched jaw, shaky hands, and profuse sweating are all indicative of anxiety. Your body may be trying to let your mind know that you're feeling anxious and stop it before it gets any worse. Do you relate to any of the problems listed here? Or do you do your best to seem okay and hide your symptoms because you feel embarrassed about your anxiety? The truth is, you're not alone, and having mental health issues is nothing to be ashamed of. But what do you plan to do next? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Psych2Go for more psychology content. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.
You have a million thoughts a day, but you don't even notice them. You just believe them. We swim through our thoughts like a fish swims through water. We don't even notice that the way we think colors our view of the world. Or sometimes we do notice, right? Sometimes we notice thoughts we don't like, and then we don't know what to do with them. Sometimes you fight them or you struggle against them. But, if for example you think, oh, I'm such an idiot, and then you tell yourself, no, I'm the smartest person in the world, it doesn't necessarily feel any better. So sometimes you get stuck in an endless loop of overthinking, obsessively struggling against a thought, or obsessively worrying about something. But that's not any better because struggle steals your attention and your energy. Our thoughts are like glasses. They are the lens through which we see the world. If you think the world is a terrible, mean place, that's what you'll see. If you think people are inherently good, that's what you'll find. In this video, you're gonna learn how to get unstuck from your thoughts. You're gonna learn how to look at your thoughts instead of through them. You're gonna learn how to take off your glasses, how to look at them, and then decide if you wanna hang on to them or if you wanna choose a different pair. This skill is called cognitive defusion. It's the difference between having a thought and buying a thought. This is such a powerful skill for processing emotions and fighting depression and anxiety. If you want to improve your mental health, the skill of cognitive defusion teaches you to separate yourself from your thoughts. And this can give you power over your thoughts instead of letting them run the show. Do you know at least 3 people? If so, then the odds are good that you know someone who experiences mental illness. But if you're like most people, you may feel anxious and uncertain about how to help. Everyone needs to learn these skills, but most people are never taught them. So I built a course with 55 short videos teaching how to help when a friend or loved one experiences mental illness. In this course, you'll learn how to build a relationship of influence, how to set healthy boundaries, what to say and what not to say. And in addition to these personal skills, you'll also learn how to help them access resources that you might not even know about, and what to do if they won't get help or if they don't want to talk about it. You really can learn how to help when someone you cares about struggles with mental health. If you'd like to learn more, click the link in the description, and you can get started today. So first, to understand cognitive defusion, we need to understand what is cognitive fusion. Your brain is a word machine. It says stuff and it thinks stuff all the time. When you look through the lens of your thoughts, this is called cognitive fusion. It's the problem of being stuck to your thoughts. Cognitive fusion is buying into every thought that passes through your mind. It's when you think something, you don't even notice it, you just believe it. In this episode, we're going to talk about recognizing all of our thoughts and separating ourselves from them, and then selectively choosing which thoughts or beliefs you want to act on or buy, as we say, instead of letting random subconscious thoughts dictate your mood, your choices, and your ultimate happiness. So let me start with a story to illustrate cognitive fusion and cognitive defusion. So once I was working with a young man who had a lot of social anxiety. We'll call him Miguel. And he had a good group of friends, but every time he hung out with them, he would start to feel really anxious. And then when he was at a party, he would make some joke or say something, and then he would start to worry. He would think, oh, did I say the wrong thing? Did I hurt her feelings? Or if, for example, one group of friends split off into the pool and another invited him to the game room, he would panic a little bit, feeling like terrified because he didn't know which group to go with. And then he'd start thinking, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm getting anxious again. I'm such a loser. And then he'd think, oh, don't think that way. What's the matter with you? Don't feel anxious. Why do you always do this? And then he would just start going back and forth in his head, right? Fighting his negative thoughts and trying not to feel anxious. And if he couldn't get his anxious thoughts to go away, he'd feel uncomfortable and he'd leave the party early. Now, in this example, Miguel was fused with his thoughts in 2 ways. The first way was that when he was trying to hang out with his friends, he got all wrapped up in trying to make his thoughts go away. He was focusing all his energy on fighting his thoughts, and that kept him stuck or fused to them instead of putting his energy into having a good time. The second way that he got fused with his thoughts is that he had an unwritten rule that he didn't even know about. He didn't notice he was thinking it, and it colored everything he did. Let me show you. So when I asked Miguel why he would get anxious, he said, well, I always worry that I might say something wrong or that I might offend someone or hurt someone's feelings. And when I asked, well, what do you mean? He said, well, I always overthink everything I say. After hanging out, I always worry that something I said might have bothered someone or that a joke I made might have hurt someone's feelings. And I just hate dealing with all the drama. So I said, what drama? He said, well, if a couple of my friends invite me to do something with them, but they don't invite my other friend, and then my other friend invites me to do something that same night, how do I say no to the other friend without making them feel bad? So I asked a follow-up question. So I said, they aren't being dramatic, you're just worrying. And he's like, yeah. I said, well, what are you most afraid of? And he said that I might make someone feel bad by saying no. So at that point I realized what was going on, and I said, it sounds like you have a rule in your head that you're never allowed to make anyone feel bad. So he thought for a second. He said, I guess so. I never noticed that I had that rule, but now that you say that, I think you're right. And then he was able to tell me some examples. He said, once I had a girlfriend who I wanted to break up with, but I didn't for like a year because I didn't want to make her feel bad. And I was like, yes, that is a good example. And then he gave me another one. He said, if the food is terrible or it's cooked wrong at the restaurant and the waiter asks, how's the food? He always says, great, even if it's a lie. So this young man, Miguel, he didn't realize he was thinking this rule, right? I can never make anyone feel bad. And this rule that he didn't even know he had was making him really anxious. He had bought that thought. He had believed it without even noticing that he was thinking that way. So in Miguel's case, he was stuck to his thoughts. It was keeping him from being present with his friends. When we buy our thoughts, when we believe everything we think, it makes it hard for us to change. So the antidote to this is learning to notice your thoughts without buying them. You learn to look at your thoughts instead of looking through your thoughts. And you notice yourself as the thinker, the place where these thoughts happen. When Miguel noticed his unwritten rule, he could see how impossible it was, how it was keeping him from having good relationships. And when he was able to notice that rule, it was like, before he noticed the rule, it was like, oh my gosh, I have to make everyone feel good or I'm a bad person. And then he looks at that rule and he's like, oh, that's a thought. That's a rule I have. And he's like, that's not very helpful. And he said, and then he was able to replace it with something more helpful. So he noticed that thought and he's like, you know what, instead of that rule, I'd like to replace it with this. I can't control how others feel, but I value being kind and assertive. So he could see both of these thoughts and he could choose which one was most helpful for him. And this helped him feel less anxiety at parties and helped him focus his energy on being present and having a good time and being kind to people. Now, this idea of cognitive defusion is kind of a difficult concept to explain, but it's easier to demonstrate. So you've got to experience it to understand it. So I'm going to give you about 4 exercises that you can try to get a feeling for what it feels like to look at your thoughts instead of through your thoughts. Now, this first activity is really easy to do with a negative thought about yourself, but I'm not going to do that on YouTube, partly because I don't want to trigger people here where they might not have been expecting that. So check out the course resources in the full course to experience that activity. And instead, we're going to do a little bit of a milder version of that activity. So for the next minute, write down or say out loud all of the thoughts that run through your mind. So, for example, you may be thinking, I don't get this, or I'm not thinking anything. And then you just notice like, oh, that's a thought too, right? And then I want you to take one of those thoughts and put the words in front of it. I'm having the thought that. And stay there for a bit. Can you notice the thought? Can you see it as the thought that you're having in this moment? Now, replay it one more time, but this time add the phrase, I notice that I'm having the thought that. So, for example, I notice I'm having the thought that this is boring. Now, what happened? Did you notice that sense of separation or distance between you and the thought? And see if you can look at yourself while having thoughts. while you're noticing yourself having thoughts, take a second to open up your awareness to what other thoughts you're having. Is work popping up in your mind? Or perhaps the thought, how much longer is this going to take? Or are there other thoughts running through your mind? And just take a second to notice them, and then to notice yourself noticing them. You just practiced cognitive diffusion, looking at your thoughts instead of through your thoughts. You are a person that experiences thoughts and emotions. Thoughts and emotions are experiences that you are having. They aren't necessarily reality, they're just something that you're experiencing. You can have thoughts without buying them. Another great way to practice this is through the Leaves on a Stream exercise. Check out that meditation on my YouTube channel. Another helpful way to separate ourselves from thoughts is to name them. Like literally. I've had clients who liked using the term, negative mind to describe the spiral of thoughts. Or for some people, they might say, oh, that's an intrusive thought, right? That's giving it a name. But it can also be helpful to give those thoughts an actual name, like Billy Bob. So for example, oh, there's Billy Bob popping up into my thoughts today. And that just means, there's those thoughts popping in, and you might be able to identify Billy Bob as kind of a negative character. So it might say things like, oh, you'll never be successful, right? So you say, oh, there's Billy Bob, or there's the bully thoughts coming in and telling me what to think. When we give our thoughts a name, we're basically saying like, oh, I am Emma, and this is a thought. Essentially separating ourselves from our thoughts. So with Miguel, he might be able to look at his thoughts and say, oh, I'm having the thought that I'm awkward, but just because I think that doesn't mean it's true. Then Miguel could say something like, oh, hello, thought. Thank you, mind, for making that thought. But that thought, oh, I'm so awkward is not super helpful to me right now. So I'm going to go back to paying attention to listening to my friend. That's another one. That's another cognitive diffusion technique. It's called thanking your mind. So you just say, thank you, mind, for that thought. That's a thought. Just because I think it doesn't mean it's true, doesn't mean I have to act on it, doesn't mean I have to believe it. Okay, here's another fun ACT exercise. They have hundreds of these, by the way, right? These are all thanks to Stephen Hayes and Jason Luoma and Russ Harris and all the other great ACT developers out there, acceptance and commitment therapy. So here's another one, using singing and silly voices, right? So you take the thought that seems really strong, like, oh, I can't go to that party if I feel anxious. And then you start to use weird voices to say that thought out loud. I can't go to that party if I feel anxious. I can't go to that party if I feel anxious. I can't go to that party if I feel anxious. Okay, I'm terrible at accents, so I should not even try, right? I can't go to that party if I feel anxious. And the basic idea is that when you start to say a thought in a bunch of weird ways, it starts to feel like this weird thing, like this weird jumble of words, instead of feel like just, the water that you're swimming in. Same thing happens if you say a word over and over again. So if, for example, Miguel is like, oh my gosh, I'm so awkward. Then he says the word awkward over and over and over again. Awkward, 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 awkward. Say it with me. Awkward, 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 awkward. And at some point, awkward all of a sudden turns into this weird jumble of sounds. That's a cognitive diffusion technique, right? This is just a word. Your brain is a word machine, and everything it makes up, some of it's true, some of it isn't. Some of it's helpful, some of it's not. It's just a thought. And when we separate ourselves from our thoughts, we can create choice for ourselves. Okay, another exercise that's often helpful is to symbolically put your thoughts onto an object to give them a tangible form. The easiest way to do this is to write it down on a piece of paper. Bruce Lee said, I have a system of ridding my mind of negative thoughts. I visualize myself writing them down on a piece of paper. Then I imagine myself crumpling up the paper, lighting it on fire, and burning it to a crisp. In residential treatment, I worked with a whole bunch of kids who found it helpful to make their thoughts concrete by putting them on an object. So I had one client who had really low self-esteem. And again, we were not forcing the kids to do this. They were choosing to engage in these activities to help themselves. And it wasn't about shame or like the Scarlet Letter or anything like that. So this young lady with low self-esteem, she decided to get a huge rock, like a 10-pound rock. And she wrote on it, I'm unlovable. And when she believed that thought, when she bought that thought, she would carry that rock around. And when she chose not to believe that thought, when she chose not to buy that thought, she would set that rock down. So she made a physical way to represent this idea of having a thought versus buying a thought. Like that rock might have still been in the room, and she might still have been noticing that rock, but just because she was noticing it didn't mean that she believed it. Lots of thoughts are going to pop up in your head throughout the day. Average people have intrusive thoughts all the time. We all might have inappropriate thoughts or negative thoughts or true thoughts or false thoughts. It's okay to have a thought. It doesn't say anything about you. Your brain is a word machine. But if you're going to buy a thought, if you're going to believe it and act on it, make that a conscious choice. One of the ways to do this is to just put it on an object, right? I've had clients who have chosen to carry rocks, sticks, and even horse poop in a bag as a way to represent themselves being fused with their thoughts. And when they're ready to notice them and separate from them, they would set these objects aside. When they no longer need that thought, they let go of an object. Sometimes they'll come back to it, but gradually just practicing, like labeling it and choosing it if they want to, that can help them kind of create that separation. Cognitive diffusion gives you the freedom to ask, does buying this thought make my life better? That's what ACT is all about. It's freeing us to live the life we value instead of getting sucked into thoughts. So you say, this is a thought. It's just a thought. I don't have to believe it. I don't have to act on it. I don't have to fight it. I can let it pass through. So the essential question is this thought helpful to me? Does it help me live my values? If the thought is helpful, you can buy it, you can believe it, you can hang on to it, you can act on it. And if it's not helpful, then you can notice it. You can just have it, but not buy it. It's just a thought. Thoughts pop up all the time, and not all of them are helpful. So for example, fusion with thoughts says, I have to stop being anxious if I want to go to parties. Or with the OCD, it says, I have to make this thought about washing my hands go away. It traps us in a cycle of fighting our thoughts or just believing them without even noticing it, right? With cognitive diffusion, we create space between ourselves and our thoughts and feelings so that they can have less of a hold over us. So you can say, I can feel anxious and go to that party. I can have the thought that I need to wash my hands 20 times, but I don't have to buy that thought. Now, let's just take a minute and contrast this with CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, right? So in section 18 and 19, we talked about challenging distorted thinking. This is a CBT skill. So you might take the thought like, I'm a complete loser, and then you would challenge that thought. You would say, that's black and white thinking. Let's look for exceptions. What would a kind friend say about that? CBT gives you the skill of challenging your thoughts, which is a helpful skill for some people or in some situations. Now, for other people, that leads them to constantly struggling against their thoughts. So with acceptance and commitment therapy, we add the skill of diffusion. It's the ability to separate yourself from your thoughts and to choose your actions. So you'd look at a thought like, I'm a complete loser, and you'd say, thanks, mind. And then you'd ask, is this thought helpful for me? Thank you, mind, for giving me this thought that I'm a complete loser, but this is just a thought. Is this thought helpful to me? And if it's not helpful, if it doesn't help you live your values, then you just let that thought be there. You let that thought pass along, do whatever thoughts do, and you just look around for another thought that's more helpful to you. Now, it's not that cognitive diffusion is better and challenging cognitive distortions is worse. It's just that these are different skills, different tools. When you add skills to your emotional tool belt, you have more flexibility to find the one that works for you. So, in summary, don't get obsessed with fighting your thoughts, with trying to make them go away, or just worrying about them or reacting to them. You don't have to believe everything you think. With cognitive diffusion, we create a little space between ourselves and our thoughts. We notice them, we say, I'm having the thought that, like I'm awkward or I'm a loser. Instead of saying, I'm a loser, say, I'm having the thought that I'm a loser. Then we can ask ourselves, is this thought helpful? Does it help me live the life I value? So does that thought help me? I'm such a loser. It doesn't really help me take any action. Okay, I'm just gonna notice that thought. I'm gonna choose one thing I can do to, make my life better or whatever that is. So that frees us to choose what's most important and to allow other thoughts to pass through so that we can focus on living the life we want. The acceptance and commitment therapy gurus have made some great videos and recordings to help people understand and practice this. So check out a few of them. The links are below. Thank you for watching and take care. This video is one skill from my 30-skill course, How to Process Your Emotions, where I teach 30 of the most essential skills for resolving depression, anxiety, and improving mental health. Emotion processing is an essential skill for working through intense emotions, but most people have never been taught how to do it. I'm putting every single main video lesson on YouTube for the world to access for free. You watching these videos, sharing them, contributing to my Patreon, and my sponsors make this possible. If you would like to access the entire course in one place, ad-free, with its workbook, exercises, downloads, extra videos, live Q&As, additional short readings, and links to extended resources, the link to buy the course is in the description below. So here's the amazing thing about your brain. It's made to rewire itself all the time. This is called neuroplasticity. Scientists used to think that after childhood, our brain was pretty much locked in place. But now that we have better imaging technology, we can literally see how the brain changes depending on how we use it. So in this video, I'm going to talk about one very simple thing you can do to rewire your brain to be less anxious. And it is simple, but it's not easy. So I'm also going to share 3 steps you can take to make it happen, and share 10 extra skills that you can develop on your own or with a therapist to build up your ability to take control of your anxiety. And if you'd like to learn more in-depth information about how to treat your anxiety, I've got a course on Udemy that I'm working on. It's called Rewiring the Anxious Brain. So you can also check out that link in the description. So let's start off with one example of neuroplasticity. In London, the taxi drivers have this super difficult exam where they have to prepare by memorizing all the streets and events and locations in this huge city. Researchers took images of their brain before they started studying and after this 2-year process, and they were literally able to see the new neural connections, the wiring that changed in the brain. And there's good evidence that changing how you think, like going to therapy, can actually change the structure of your brain and the types of chemicals that it's pumping out. Our brain has an amazing ability to rewire itself, to learn, grow, and heal. So let's talk about how to do that with anxiety. If we want to change how our brain processes anxiety, we need to understand 3 principles of anxiety. Number 1, understand what is anxiety. Now, this may sound dumb because you already know what anxiety feels like, but what you need to do is understand your perspective on anxiety. You need to let go of the idea that anxiety is bad. Anxiety is not inherently bad. Anxiety is uncomfortable. Sometimes anxiety is disordered. Sometimes anxiety gets in the way, but we all experience anxiety because it's supposed to serve a really important function, to motivate us to avoid real danger. We're supposed to feel anxious when standing on a cliff edge. It helps us be safe. We're supposed to feel anxious when we know we have an important test coming up, because that should motivate us to study. Anxiety tells us that something is important to us. Anxiety and excitement are basically the same chemical reaction in your body, with adrenaline triggering that sympathetic activation and prepping you for action. When we look at anxiety as being uncomfortable but acceptable and a normal part of life, suddenly we develop new tools to work with it. And that includes working with the other type of anxiety. So the second thing we need to understand is we need to understand disordered anxiety. And this is when anxiety seems to take over your life. This is anxiety that makes it hard to go to work, to school, or to enjoy life at all. And the harder you try to make it go away, the stronger and stronger it gets. Now, contrary to popular belief that anxiety is disordered when it's more severe, anxiety is actually disordered when one of 2 things happens. When, number 1, when you feel in danger when you're actually safe, and I made a video on this, it's called Perceived versus Actual Safety. For example, I worked with a client who was afraid of radiators. She would feel anxious and sweaty around them, and she couldn't make herself go into a room with a radiator in it. Now, radiators are not actually dangerous, but she was having a real physiological response to something that was actually safe. So anxiety can be disordered when you have a danger response in your body, but you're actually safe. The second way anxiety can be disordered is when your anxiety interferes with your ability to function. This is essentially what determines if you meet the criteria for an anxiety disorder diagnosis. When your anxiety or your attempts to avoid anxiety stop you from effectively facing life. When this happens, you start avoiding school or calling in sick to work. You stop leaving the house or spending time with friends. Pretty soon your anxiety is taking over your life and stopping you from doing the things you love. So let's talk about what causes anxiety to spiral out of control. This is called the anxiety cycle. Every day throughout our day, we have experiences, and we interpret these experiences as either being safe or dangerous. So let's say, for example, you see a dog. Now, each person interprets an experience differently. For some people, this would be exciting and fun, but for some reason you think, that dog is gonna bite me. This leads to feelings of fear, anxiety, maybe even panic. These are uncomfortable feelings, and you may even take them as a sign that your thoughts are true. So you escape, you run away, you get out of there, and nothing bad happens. So your brain releases this surge of relief. Whew, that was close. The only way I survived was because I ran away. I could have died. And your brain thinks, I better do that again. I'm going to motivate my human to avoid that situation by increasing their anxiety about it. And voila, your anxiety goes up. Every single time that we avoid a threat and survive, our brain thinks, let's do that again. So it lays down neural pathways, this wiring that reinforces that behavior. And the whole function of emotions is to motivate us to action. But that's a whole other video. So our brain, because we've convinced it that the dog was a threat, it takes action into its own hands, and it increases your anxiety level around dogs. Every time we feel anxiety and then avoid the situation, our anxiety level will go up a notch. So this is principle number 3. Avoidance feeds disordered anxiety. It literally creates overwhelming anxiety. Now, there are lots of ways to avoid. There's running away and physically avoiding, but there's also emotional avoidance. So if you have social anxiety, you might still go to the party, but only if you get drunk ahead of time. Or you might be in a relationship, but scared of getting hurt, so you don't allow yourself to let the other person into your heart. You stay emotionally distant, or you protect yourself by not committing. Social media, anger, blame, distraction, and even coping skills can be avoidant. Regardless of the type of avoidance, it increases your anxiety, and even worse, it shrinks down your world. So with the dog example, you might start avoiding situations where a dog might be present by not going to friends' homes or skipping the park, and your world shrinks. You miss out on good relationships, or you stop going to parties, and your world gets more and more constrained. Avoidance can make your world small and scary and unhappy. But every time you get anxious and avoid something and survive, your brain increases your anxiety in that area. Now, looking at this cycle, we have 2 places where we can intervene, where we can stop that anxiety from spiraling out of control. The first place is with our actions. When we feel anxiety, but we're actually safe, if we stick with it, if we stay there, we experience our emotions and sensations without running away. And again, if you do this and you don't die, then your brain learns, phew, what a relief. I guess that not all dogs are dangerous. Let's do that again. And it sends out a surge of relief. This leads to a gradual decrease in anxiety over time, and a gradual increase in your emotional muscles, your ability to feel emotions and sensations that are uncomfortable without needing to escape them all the time. So you get better at feeling. As you do this, your brain literally lays down new neural pathways saying, not all dogs are dangerous. I don't need to be anxious around dogs. And it literally changes your brain chemistry, releasing less cortisol and adrenaline and other stress hormones. This is the most straightforward way to rewire your brain to have less anxiety. But I get it, this is super hard. If it were easy, you would have already done it. So I'm going to break it down into 3 big steps for you. Now, on a side note, the second place in this cycle to intervene is with your thoughts, changing how you think about the dog. And this can be a powerful and effective treatment too, but it can also get really complicated. And it works best before you're anxious rather than during. Now, I talk about some of the ways you can change your thinking in other videos, but in this video, we're going to talk about the most straightforward way to rewire the anxious brain, and that's through action. So, how to do it? There are 3 steps. So, step 1, make an exposure hierarchy. I've made an entire video about this, but basically you take one thing that scares you and you break it down into teeny tiny steps. And you start by courageously facing the easiest one first. Now, this is the part that most people miss. They jump in too fast and then they panic or they escape and they never do it again. And then that fear is reinforced. So make an exposure hierarchy and write down as many teeny little steps as you can think of. Step 2, change your rules. Now, courage doesn't mean the absence of fear, but choosing that something is more important than avoiding fear. In acceptance and commitment therapy, this is called willingness, allowing yourself to do something even though it makes you uncomfortable. If you make a rule for yourself, like, I'm going to do this until I get too anxious, then your brain will be like, cool, let's do that. Then I can escape. So it will make you really anxious. And when we say, I'm going to do this thing unless it makes me too anxious, then we're just inviting anxiety to make all our decisions for us. So when it comes to exposure, you choose an easier activity to start with, and then you stay with it, and you watch yourself for a certain amount of time, or until your anxiety decreases by half during the exposure. Now, while you're facing your anxiety and practicing willingness, grounding activities and self-regulation activities, this body-up approach to decreasing anxiety can be helpful. But the most important part is that you sit with your anxiety for a little while until it decreases, or at least for a certain set amount of time. Now, step 3, do it. Face it. Go get anxious and see if you survive. Little spoiler alert here, you will. So with the dog example, start by repeatedly imagining yourself interacting with a dog, and you practice this every day for 10 minutes until that activity no longer makes you very anxious. And then you might work with a friend who has a dog to set up the next steps. So you might see a dog through a window, and you just stay there and you sit with it and you breathe and you allow yourself to relax. And you do this every day for 10 minutes until your anxiety decreases. And then you practice being in the same room as a tiny dog on a leash, and then perhaps touching a tiny dog on a leash, and then petting a tiny dog on a leash. And eventually you're moving up to a bigger dog and then off a leash. Then eventually you get yourself to the point where you can go to a dog park, sit down, and stay there for 30 minutes. It's okay if you feel anxious. It's okay if you feel uncomfortable or you sweat or you shake or whatever, but you just stick with it. And pretty soon your brain learns it's cool. Most dogs are safe. You're okay. And your anxiety will decrease. Now, again, you can do some physiological grounding activities while in the midst of your anxiety, but don't use those as another way to just avoid anxiety. Use those as a way to practice willingness, this willingness to feel what you're feeling and accept it as being normal, natural, and okay. So there's the simple solution to anxiety. Face your fears and they will decrease. This may seem too simple or too impossible, too big of a leap. So therapists have devised a bunch of ways to break that leap down into a bunch of tiny steps, a bunch of skills that you can learn to make it easier. If you want to go more in depth into that, let's do that. Let's talk about the more detailed process of how we do this, the specific skills that help us move from anxiety avoidance to power over our anxiety. Because I'm trying to cram so much information into this topic, I've decided to split this video up into 2 parts. So check out part 2 for the 10 skills you can develop to help you face your fears. gradual exposure therapy, which is what I just described, is a research-backed approach shown to help reduce anxiety and treat anxiety disorders. It does this because it literally changes the brain, rewiring the neural pathways and changing the release of chemicals in the brain. So make sure to check out my part 2 with those 10 skills to help you face your fears. And if you'd like to learn more in-depth information about how to treat your anxiety, I've got a course on Udemy that I'm working on. It's called Rewiring the Anxious Brain. So you can also check out that link in the description. Now, please share this video. You never know who might benefit from it. Thanks for watching and take care.